Welcome to Tech Ascent, the podcast where we dive into the trends, strategies, and success stories that are reshaping the tech landscape as we know it today. I'm your host, Oliver Klingane. I'm also the founder of Ascension, the primary business development partner within tech. Today, we're joined by a very exciting guest. We're joined by Farouk Khan, the founder and CEO of Inference Analytics. Farouk, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Oliver.
It's a pleasure. Would you mind telling the audience a little bit about yourself and what you guys do?
I'm founder and CEO of Inference Analytics. We're an AI company focused on healthcare. We've been working in the Gen AI space since well before people knew of ChatGPT. So before text generation was considered cool, we were doing it. So dating all the way back to like 2018 timeframe.
Hmm.
And we're focused on use cases that help hospitals operate better. So very much focused on the healthcare and life sciences space, but then now expanding out to other industries as well, because everyone seems to want to do AI these days.
Awesome. And you mentioned there you started kind of using AI before the big boom took off back in 2018.
Yeah.
What did you see that made you want to start Inference Analytics?
Yeah, it's a great question, Oliver. And my buddies always ask me that why are you so fixated on this technology? Because at that point, it wasn't considered very cool to do text generation, right? So think about somebody doing Chat GPT type stuff back in 2018. And if you encountered that technology and you could see what it could do, you would be fixated on it too, right?
Hmm.
So think about it, right? Like if you could have Chat GPT in 2018 and you could see the power, you would stay fixated on it. So that was what drove me to it. I had a very exciting product and a tech team that was, I would say, well ahead of its curve, of its time, right? And so my co-founder built this text generation platform focused on some use cases in healthcare. And it was, to me, having been in tech for a long time, it was probably the most innovative technology I'd seen. And I think in a way I was right, because when ChatGPT took off, the rest of the world also started getting fixated on this, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah.
think of it like, I got ChatGPT way early, right
Hmm.
before anybody else did. And I got hooked on it and I was like, this is going to change the world. And so that's why, I was focused on it.
Yeah, you knew what the potential of it was. And I think in 2018, if I had ChatGPT, I would have been a freshman in college. So I definitely
Yeah.
would have put it to work.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But now that you've been in the industry, the AI space, 2018 is 2025 now. So it's been about 7.5 years. What's kind of the biggest changes that you've noticed?
Yeah, I think the biggest change, Oliver, mainly is in the perception of AI, right? So a couple of things. One, it has so much hype around it that every second conversation is around AI these days, right? And so that was not the case before. And back when we started, people didn't think text generation was even AI, right? People did not think that what we were doing was AI. They thought that AI was all about robots or about automatically detecting, sort of in healthcare, it was all about cancer detection from images, from scans, right? And from radiology. And so text generation was not considered AI. So a couple of things have happened. First, like I said, right, there's a lot of appreciation for AI. So everyone wants to talk about it. And then secondly, text generation has been accepted right into the world of AI, and so everyone thinks of it in those terms and sort of understands the potential. So those are kind of some of the changes that have happened, and then coming into actual use cases, uh, there is a lot of because of the extent of how fast all of this is moving and the improvements that we're seeing in the world of AI, the world of AI models, whether it's closed source models like, OpenAI, or whether it's open source models. And, you heard the news about DeepSeek's R1, right, a few days ago, right? And so all of that is pushing innovation at a very, very fast pace. And so it's very important as a player in AI to know what role you're playing, because there are a lot of moving parts, and to be able to play in the right space and do things that are meaningful and put you in a place where you have an opportunity for a business outcome and for business growth is sort of the key challenge that I face right now. So yeah, it's exciting times. It's everyone is doing it, but that in a way creates a challenge as well, because now you have to differentiate yourself. But at the same time, I do think it's a very exciting time because the use cases and the impact it's going to have on society as a whole is tremendous, right? And there are going to be many improvements that we'll be able to make, many inefficiencies that we will be able to eliminate as a result of that.
There's been so much growth, like you said, and
Yeah.
it's changed not only the business environment in terms of competition and growth, but just the standard kind of life environment. Just like you said, kind of growing those efficiencies, fixing things that shouldn't need to be fixed. And we can date it back a little bit. When you first started in 2018, what was that competitive landscape like? And you mentioned nowadays AI is pretty much every other conversation. It's getting bought up. What was that like when you first started?
AI was not considered that buzzword, right? I mean, there was machine learning. People would look at predictive analytics, right? And so it was a bit of a, you could say, a very well defined area of technology, right? Where there were teams that were doing machine learning, and to a certain extent, machine learning and that form of AI has been going on for years, well before 2018, right? And so at that point, the AI term was and especially in healthcare, was exclusively used in sort of the imaging world, right? There were many companies that had been invented back in 2015, 2014 that were doing image-oriented AI, right? Where they would automatically detect some anomaly from an image. And so that's the world that we were operating in, right? That everyone was doing image AI. And then here we came along and we thought, well, everyone's doing image AI. We had the team to go after image AI as well, but we said, no, there's all this text that exists in healthcare, and it's creating enormous burden for providers, for the entire environment, for the entire organization, right, to be able to deal with the text. And so, how do you automate that? How do you make it easier? How do you make it easy to write that text? How to make it easy to even get to consume that text, right? And so that's the world we tried to kind of step into, and it wasn't easy sailing because people didn't understand it, right? When we showed them like a text generation model that sort of did something like what ChatGPT does, it was almost considered magical, right? People were like, well, how did it do that? Like, how did it write that sentence, right? And so now it's kind of considered accepted, but at that point it was not. And so that was the challenge, right? The challenge was getting people to understand that this was AI, that there was a fair bit of research and science that was involved in building it. And then on the other side, there weren't LLMs, right? There was no chat GPT or even open source models. So you had to build your own infrastructure. You kind of had to build your own version of a large language model. And it was very specific. It was very much tied to a use case. And it wasn't as performant, right, as some of the new models that you see. So that was the landscape we were operating in when it all started for us.
That was super interesting. And now we can flash forward a bit to 2025. You
Yeah.
mentioned earlier the big influx of companies having to differentiate yourself, kind of put more efforts towards that. What's the competitive landscape like now?
Yeah, the competitive landscape is continuously evolving, right? And I feel like while there is enormous sort of focus on new companies that are building some form of AI tech, uh, on the other side of the coin, the consumption side, the use case side, right? There's still a huge gap, right? Where you talk to organizations, still I feel that if you're selling into enterprises or if you're talking to enterprises, whether it's hospitals or any other sort of enterprise, uh, you're going to see that there is a scarcity of AI talent, right? And so while there are titles being created about AI, there's still a big gap between what organizations feel they can do and they understand with AI. And so that gap needs to be bridged, right? And so to me, while there is an enormous sort of, you could say, competitive pressure where a lot of companies are claiming to do AI, the the customer on the other side does not really understand it that well. And for people who have an advantage in understanding the customer's problem, in understanding the use case, they can actually still maintain an edge because that is where the key to it lies, right? Like, how do you use AI? Where do you implement it? And it's not necessarily about perhaps building the large language model, but in defining that use case is where these solutions are getting shaped. right? Because if you think about it, the analogy I always make is it's almost like the internet just got built, right? That's where we are. And before the internet was built, many of the current companies did not exist. And after the internet, all kinds of companies got built. And so that's the world we're in, where AI is almost, analogous in a way, but way more powerful than the internet, right? The internet was basically you could say the connectivity, the plumbing, right, that connected everything together. AI is way more than that, right? It understands, or at least it's able to predict words in a way that it makes it look like it's understanding what you're trying to say. But now with that, the key for us is now that how do you use that to your advantage? And there are going to be many applications that are going to be built on top of this AI infrastructure and many use cases. And so for people who understand use cases, who understand the business problem and can connect with the AI wave, there's an enormous opportunity, right? And so I think it's a very exciting time in the industry to kind of be doing tech, to be doing AI.
110%. And as you shared it, it is just a true level up from the birth of the internet. It's
Yep.
it's changing the game completely. And there you mentioned there's kind of that gap around consumer awareness. Of course, being in the tech space, we've got a good grasp on what AI does, what it's capable of at this point in time. How do you and Inference Analytics, how do you go about educating consumers, educating prospects about what you guys are capable of?
Yeah. I mean, so first, Oliver, for us, we don't believe that AI should be sort of exclusively accessed by a certain few individuals, right? And not just in terms of using. So I know everyone is starting to become close to being a user of ChatGPT. Like there's a claim that, ChatGPT could rival Google in terms of the number of visits, right, that people have to it, or and other AI platforms as well, right? I know DeepSeek had an enormous surge in usage, right? So while all of that is going on, um, we believe that the world needs to know how to build AI, right? And so our thought process is that we want to create tools that allow non-AI people to build AI solutions, which means that you should not have to be a Python programmer to build AI. And the same thing happened way back as well, right? I mean, there were other forms of technology that was developed where one basic example is there was a technology called SQL, structured query language. It's considered like the most basic form of programming, right? It's basically has no syntax. But very quickly, a lot of tools had to be built to allow everyday people to write, sort of build applications on top of that. So similarly, with AI, while the code that is being written by machine learning engineers is usually in Python, we believe non-Python programmers should be able to use tools that can allow them to build applications. And so our whole thought process is that the world needs to know how to build AI applications. There are too many use cases for the applications to be built by an individual company. We believe that business users who understand their business problems should start building their own applications. And we want to be in that world of providing them the tools that allow them to build those applications. And so that's kind of our thought process, right? The world needs to be educated about how to do it. There are specific nuances for each aspect of how AI is built, and the world needs to be educated about it. And it's not impossible to train people about around those concepts. So that's the way we think about the world, right? Like we think consumers need to be told how they should build their own applications, and then because of the breadth of how far reaching these use cases are, it's going to have to be a lot of people to do who will have to build those, and some of those consumers would have to be the builders of those applications as well.
Fantastic mindset. And when you started in 2018, identifying use cases, kind of figuring out what gap you could fill in this AI market, there's so many different industries, so many different ways you could have gone about it. Why'd you choose the medical space? What caught your eye?
Yeah, great point, right? So I'd actually before, and I'd been on this journey. My previous job was at IBM. I ran IBM's big data team. So I've been in the data space for many years before I came into this and started this company. Uh, so my focus has always been generally not healthcare because I felt healthcare was slow moving. It was a hard space to crack. But one of the key lessons I learned when I started my own company was that healthcare had the most untapped data set, right? So there was a lot of data, very valuable data, and very impactful data. So that was one of the key drivers for why I looked at healthcare data. And then the second thing was that once you had data sets, that is what drove these solutions. So for me, it wasn't like we decided to build AI one day, right? And said, okay, here's a hammer. Now let's go start looking for these nails. It was the other way around. We got data sets in clinical documentation, actually in very deep, in radiology. So we were able to get a lot of data from a provider through a partnership that we had with them. And because of that is why we built AI, because we looked at the problem and we said, hey, there's a ton of documentation that these clinicians write. Can we take that task and cut it in half, right? And basically let AI do half of it, right? So that was the simplest way to think about it. That they're writing all these documents, let's make them write half of them, right? By using AI to write the other half. That's a simplistic way of looking at it. And so that's what drove us to AI, right? So it wasn't so much the other way around. We wanted to build AI, and then it was more that we found data sets, we found problems, we found use cases that drove the development of the AI that we had built. And it turned out to be this whole space of large language model. I had a very talented team, my co-founder, heavy in machine learning and AI, and they developed these architectures that were groundbreaking at that time because, this is what eventually LLM started to do, right? So that's kind of how we got into this.
Gotcha. So you saw you identified the problem, identified the outcome needed to solve that problem, and then the AI just happened to be the process to get there.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And that's very important, right? Because we didn't look at it the other way and said, okay, we are AI developers, let's find use cases to solve. Like we had the use case, we had the data, we had the problem, we had the subject matter experts who were sitting with us, and we said, oh, what if we automate this and this and this? And they were like, yeah, do that. And we're like, oh, how do we do it? We're like, okay, we need to build a whole AI system to do that, right? And that's kind of how it
happened. And I'd love to hear your perspective on this. With a bunch of companies coming into the AI space, I think a bunch of founders have the opposite mindset of they're putting AI first and the outcome and the product second. What's your kind of perspective on that space? Is that something you're seeing? Is that something, because you've been in it for so long, I'm sure you've seen a lot of different things happen.
Yeah, I think people are kind of approaching it that way, and it's not. I mean, it's hard not to, right? Especially if you haven't been experienced in understanding some of the business problems, and you're now suddenly waking up to this whole AI wave. What do you do? Do you go learn business problems or do you learn AI? Right? It's a hard challenge, right? Because the obvious thing is to say, oh, run towards AI and then figure out. So I can see why that's happening, but it's very important to understand the depth of what AI needs to do, because it's, to stay superficially at a certain level to be able to do the generic things will not be enough, right? You'd have to understand the business processes in depth. And so that's why it's almost important for those people who are doing that to partner up with strong business domain subject matter experts, because those people know their problem. And we're getting to a point where AI is going to be embedded in anything that's digital, right? Or maybe not necessarily even digital. Anything that's electronic that we do today should have an element of AI in it. And so the end use cases will be so broad and so many that you have to be very closely tied to the end business problem, and not just at a surface level, but at an in-depth level. And when you do that, now you have a clear-cut advantage because you know that business problem really well, right? And you can talk that language. And so I think it's hard to not do that if you have just woken up and started a career and you're like, okay, wow, this AI is really cool. But the point I would just make is make sure then that you are tying yourself and with very close business partners who understand the problem in depth, because otherwise you're going to miss the mark.
Awesome answer. And Farouk, we've seen we'll call it the AI gold rush for now.
Yeah.
You've been in the space since 2018. How are you positioning Inference Analytics to come out thriving on the other side of this?
Yeah, so Oliver, I mean, we've started, the one thing that I've maintained in my company is to maintain a leading edge, right? So we are never fixated on any one tech, right? So I'll give you an example. When ChatGPT came out, some of my guys who've been working on LLM type technology were like, looked at it and like, oh, why should we use OpenAI, right? And we were like, and their point of view was we'll use our own, or we'll use open source. And my push was no, we need to use everything, right? And we need to then find our niche, right? And so you cannot sort of go, swim against the wave, right? You've got to make sure that you're taking advantage of the latest tools. And the great advantage is there is amazing open source tech that came out, right? And so for me, it's always about maintaining a leading edge, right? Whether while we're building our own platform, and we have built a platform that allows people to do AI much easier, right? And so it's almost a drag and drop platform that people can use to build an AI chatbot, right? You could use it to build a site like in 5 minutes, right? Without using any code. But while we're maintaining all that, our key is to maintain that edge, right? And so we continuously are innovating, like, and looking at the market, looking in the industry and seeing what's coming up, and we partnered with some of these players as well, right? So we were one of the early partners of NVIDIA as well. We had worked on their early AI models. And so for us, it's always maintaining that leading edge. You never want to be left far behind. This is a changing space. So while we're building our own platform, you have to keep an eye on, okay, what is the world doing today, right? So DeepSeek came out and we're like, okay, so we allow for all these open source, closed source models as part of our platform. We also want to allow DeepSeek as well, right? And so now again, there's ways to kind of make sure that you're not necessarily ahead, but at least staying at par with what's going on in terms of innovation, while at the same time, one thing we continue to do is we are not just, sort of the propeller heads who are out there trying to, run towards the next shiny thing. We have a client and customer sort of link as well. So the way we innovate is we have customers we are working with in healthcare. We're solving real problems for them using AI. And so it's almost like some of our solutions are going into that, while at the same time, we're building a platform that allows these people to build solutions themselves as well. So maintaining that customer edge is also important. So the both sides of the coin. One is leading edge. Make sure you know what the world is doing, where the innovation is coming from. Maintain your own innovation in that space, and their constant IP that we're creating. And then at the same time, link to business, link to customers, right? So we're solving problems every day. So we have two sides that all of my developers do, right? So every developer in my team has a responsibility to, okay, you're going to help us continue to evolve on our platform. But guess what? We have this new customer going live and they're implementing that tech, that AI platform. Your part of your time needs to be spent in making sure that is also being very successful, right? And so that maintains a very important sort of way of thinking about how we need to innovate. So it cannot be impractical. It's practical, but it's tied to reality. And the reality is what we're doing with the customer, right? So that's kind of the way we're doing it, if it makes sense.
100%. Evolution, it's a superpower. And it sounds like you've positioned Inference Analytics to keep evolving, keep growing with the market. You've done a great job so far. Farouk, I've got one last question for you before we wrap it up. Going forward, you've been in the space for 7 years, 2018 to 2025. If we're having this conversation in 2032, so 7 years from now, what bold predictions do you have for the AI space? Where are we going?
I mean, it's such a fast-moving space. I do believe that while AI had been around for such a long time, text AI somehow changed the game in a very meaningful way, right? And I'm waiting to see what other paradigm shifts happen, right? And so people claim robotics may be a key aspect of where things go. So you could expect that a lot of robotic type technology may be sort of on the horizon more than what we've had in the past. I think that could be an angle that the world kind of evolves into. I think I think so that's on the tech side, and it's again very hard to predict that, but there's almost an AI race going on, and it'd be foolish to kind of say exactly where it's going to be, but I do believe some area of robotics, multimodal models, I think that kind of tech will probably happen. I think on the other side, from a human resource perspective, from a worker's perspective or corporate workers' perspective, knowledge workers' perspective, I think there's going to be evolution, right? And so while certain jobs are going to be eliminated, and there's no question about that, unfortunately, that will happen. I think there will be new types of jobs that are created, and I think just as the simple example is like you had YouTube when once YouTube came out, right? The whole concept of influencers and these whole new kind of waves of jobs or functions were created. I think similar things will happen in AI as well. And so, knowledge workers need to be mindful of that. I think people need to use AI, so you cannot shy away from it. Use it as much as possible because that will give people ideas for where the innovation will go and where what they need to do about their own careers, right? And so I think, yeah, so just to be, kind of sort of generally sort of the way I would put it in terms of the future is that multimodal models, probably some areas of more robotics, and then evolution of careers and jobs, right, into new types of AI functions that didn't exist. I think those things will most likely happen in the next 7 years.
I can see it, and I guess we're going to have you on episode 2 of in 2032.
Yep, yep.
See if the
I'll be
predictions
looking
come true.
forward to it. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Farouk, that's all I've got for you today. I really appreciate you coming on the show, dropping some wisdom about the AI space, what you've seen in it over the past 7 years. It's been a great conversation.
Thanks for having me, Oliver. Really appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
Of course. And for all the listeners out there, I'll put all of Farouk's and Inference's analytics websites and down below. You guys can go check them out. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.